Hello and welcome to the Decision Makers podcast. This is the podcast which puts you into the boardroom where football's biggest decisions are made. We'll reveal to you the secrets of the industry from the people who know it best. We've got another great episode coming for you today. I'm Hugh Wizencroft. Nice to see you again. And alongside me, as always, Marlon Fleischman, Managing Director of Unique Sports Group, and Curtis Davies, former West Brom and Aston Villa defender as well. And I'm delighted to say this week's episode is a special one. We're going to be discussing football and the media. To help us do so, all those interesting cogs of it, social media, you know, the way that players interact with you, of course, those big football stories and transfer news, of course, is the world-leading journalist, football journalist in particular, David Ornstein. Now, don't be so humble, David. Thank you for being with us.
It's a pleasure, a real privilege to be with you all. And I've been listening to the episodes. They've been fantastic. So I feel slightly inadequate. I put the only award I've pretty much ever won behind me, but I still don't fit the description and the billing you just gave me. But no, I'm really looking forward to this.
For me personally, of course, it's a real pleasure to have you, not just a former colleague and a friend, Sunday League teammate extraordinaire, David Ornstein, by the way. So it's a real pleasure to have you and discuss.
Oh, I never knew this.
Yeah, we go way back. He's always injured. He's one of those sick note Darren Anderton. But when he
too busy working.
When he does get out there, he's a pretty special player and a very special journalist, as we know, of course. But actually, the main reason I'm so delighted to have David with us is, like me, he truly does care about journalism. He doesn't just do it as a job. You know, responsible journalism, high quality, accurate journalism. Believe me, this guy cares a lot about. And I think that transitions through the work that you see him do, whether he's speaking to you on broadcasting or whether he's writing those incredible stories at The Athletic. So like I say, delighted to have you with us, David. And I just wanted to start by really asking you about that relationship between football and the media and how you see it this year, this day and age. Do you think that relationship is good or bad?
Firstly, the checks in the post. I've never been bigged up like that before, but no, I do take a great deal of pride and care in our profession and the industry as a whole, and that transcends into the football side of things too. I think the relationship is critically important because whether people like it or not, the media is powerful. It's part of the environment. It's been here forever and it's here to stay. And so if everybody can coexist, I think that's healthy. We've all got a lot at stake here. It's not always easy. You need to understand the boundaries and work with dignity and respect and professionalism at all times. But I and many others, yourself included, have shown what's possible in our various different guises. You more on the presentation side, me on reporting, and there is a role for everybody. I think the sort of chemistry is really interesting. It's difficult because, you know, the stakes are getting ever higher in terms of the work I do, like the deals, the transfers, the contracts, the managerial changes, the sporting director appointments, the incidents inside clubs and injuries and the politics and the stakeholders have so much to gain, but also to lose. If you think of an industry that's ever more lucrative, they're really professionalizing in terms of clubs and governing bodies, layers of protection to stop stories getting out and to control the narrative because of their partnerships, their sponsors, their fan bases, the public perception of them, you know, is king really, and it defines so much that extends way beyond sport. It's the same in politics and different areas of society. And so to have a media and to have journalism where the purpose is to try and sort of inform, educate, entertain, but serve the public, to give them accurate information, whether it be on relatively trivial things like where a player might be moving, all the way up to much high profile areas such as alleged corruption or, I don't know, sexual offences, things that really do matter. And one of the things I prioritize on a daily basis is even an hourly or minute by minute basis in phone conversations, in meetings, coffees, lunches, dinners, text message exchanges, you name it, is trying to build a sort of a bond of sorts with everybody you speak to, from executives to directors, owners, agents, managers, coaches, players, physios, family members, the whole landscape, and do things the right way, because it is possible to produce really good and important media content and not create carnage and conflict and acrimony and burn bridges, and this all comes from the values that I was kind of brought up on in my life, but also in my journalism training and getting into the industry and getting work experience and doing other jobs. The sort of values and the ethics that were sort of passed on to me, learned, and have become my sort of calling card. That's what I live and breathe. So, showing total respect and fulfilling my duty as a journalist by looking into things, interrogating, asking the right questions, having the bravery to take this further towards a potential story, and then the courage to publish. But only after you've done the checks, you've had the proper conversations, you make sure everybody is aware. You try to be maybe what I like to think is a more modern day journalist, where it's not seen as them against us. It's not, and sometimes the line is very thin and blurred. But to say, like, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do it in a to the highest level and standards, and I'm not going to try and sneak round the back. And the suggestion historically that journalists are whatever expletive you want to give if you're a member of the public or a politician or somebody in high standing authority. No, they do a valued job, and they can do it in a way that kind of adds to everything and the society and the sphere that we live in. And so I could go on talking about it, but I kind of prioritize doing the checks to the best of my ability. When I'm going out and broadcasting or writing, making sure within what I can control that it's accurate, that if I'm not sure about something, that I don't push forward, that I err on the side of caution. If that means stepping back and losing something, that's okay. If it means that somebody else gets something that I was on the right lines on, but I didn't feel was quite ready or the right thing to do, that's okay. Not over-egging information I have, or grandstanding or sensationalizing that can really anger people. Having mature conversations about when it's okay to release stuff, how to do it within reason without undermining my integrity, and ultimately coming out of those situations with at times like everybody being okay and satisfied, and at times limiting the damage, and to emerge with respect, and that's kind of what I feel I've got to a large degree. Mistakes happen. I'm not perfect. Nobody is out there. But in this time where the media is proliferating, is fragmenting with social media, with fake news, with rumors that have no basis, of Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok and the various other platforms, and there are many of them, the ability of people to produce their own content largely without repercussions, whether it be members of the public, whether it be journalists, whether it be people in a position of authority, whether it be the players and the actors in this industry themselves. Like, there is still hope out there that there's a role for journalism, and done in the right way, it can bring really valuable content material and add layers of quality to this weird and wonderful world.
You've summed it up absolutely brilliantly there, and I think people will get a real indication of how you view our industry and how important you do take your job. I know that people don't get to talk to you particularly about what you do on a day-to-day basis. We're going to pick up on a lot of what you've had to say there about the industry shortly, but I next just wanted to ask about David Ornstein's week, because when you were talking about all those coffees and all of those meetings and all of those things that you do to try and generate a story, you know, some of the stories that you come out with, people have absolutely no idea that they're happening, which is a rare thing in today's age. And, you know, people at home might get images of you, I don't know, peering through the bushes at a training ground, or, you know, rummaging through the bins outside someone's house. You know, how do you get these stories on a week-to-week basis? What does your diary look like?
I'm not quite that seedy and salacious, but not far off. So there's no script or syllabus or set pattern to what I do. It's not a potion that I was lucky to get or find, and then I'm able to capitalize off the back of it. What I do has largely come from preparation in terms of my background and getting into journalism from way back at school, when I did some work experience at Capital Radio in London, and some brilliant journalists there, especially on the sports side, who are top operators within the industry now, commentators, producers, people like that, who imparted the sort of values and ways of working and behaving that are absolutely critical to me today. And so this was all the background to then, you know, starting to deliver the stories. And in that journey, you're meeting people, you're going out to events, you're using your own initiative. Sometimes at the beginning, it was just off my own back, going to matches, reserve team games, youth matches, seeing that there was an event or a conference within the industry, trying to watch a training session somewhere, meeting someone who would let you come down to their club in the lower leagues. And that's when you pick up, you know, you shake hands, you meet people, you pick up phone numbers, email addresses. Sometimes you get lucky. Someone says, oh, speak to this person. You've got their number. And bit by bit, you're building, at the time, literally a black book, a little black book of contacts that people talked about. Now it's obviously all on your phone, largely. And it becomes like a body of evidence in a police investigation. And when I'm thinking of like Line of Duty, and they have different faces on whiteboards, and they all link from this time and this place and this job and this club and this country, it all kind of comes together like that. Or somebody you knew moves around. So, you know, you put the hard yards in to go and watch that reserve team game in the Northern Premier League in 2007. And you met somebody there, like a scout who was watching a player, or an agent who was looking after a player, or a physio who was working at one of these places. And you keep in touch with them. And some of them, they stay in those roles, or they retire, or something, they go into a different part of the industry. I still keep in contact with them. But there are some who then move into areas of higher prominence. They go to a bigger club, or they gain a massive client who goes on to great success. Or they're a player like Curtis, who develops in their own career. And you were there at the start. And therefore, the bonds that are built are kind of unbreakable in many cases. Not all. Some drift away. They know you're a journalist. They don't want to speak to you. They're in a massive job, and there's so much to lose. And that's okay, by the way. That's probably one of my skills, is no pressure. It's absolutely fine. I don't want to cause anybody any problems. Like I don't with my stories, by the way. Like I don't go out to cause an explosion. I go out to try and do good work when I can. And so these connections build up over a long, long time in many different places. Some by luck, family, friends. There is no rhyme or reason to it. And when you've got that grounding, you then reach a point where you are privy to information. And as you pointed out there, it could be just keeping in touch with people on the phone, or seeing them at the side of a pitch at kids' football these days, or like you pointed out, a coffee or an event or a lunch or a dinner or a breakfast or drinks, or shaking hands at a stadium. I go a long way sometimes just to see people and get eye contact and kind of keep things ticking over. It's organic as well. I'm not doing it. Oh, I'm a journalist. I've got to get stories. I've got to get interviews. I really feel it. It's the world I live in. It pays my salary. It helps me in my life and my family. Many of these people are friends of mine. But even if they are, there are professional lines that need to be drawn, and that's fine. And so bit by bit, you are building to the point where you are well connected, is what I've explained there. Sorry, a long-winded way of doing so. And then when you are well connected, you are able to discuss information on stories. Some of it, it would be a shock back in the day if it was a scoop or it hadn't been in the public domain. What do I do with this? And you talk it through, and maybe you might break a little story here or there, or a story breaks elsewhere and it becomes a bit less sensitive, so you can speak to people and say, it's already out there now, is it okay if I do something? And many of those occasions I did something, but I was at a bigger place like the BBC, so something would break in a different country and you would make the checks and people would be okay with it. But because it was suddenly in the UK and on the BBC, they were like, David Ornstein with this huge story. And I would always be at pains to say, well, it was originally in Sweden or somewhere. But that helps you build your reputation. In the meantime, you're still applying the values of what you've learned. So you're doing things the right way. You're making the right check calls. You're following your editorial guidelines of the place you work, which is to at least multiply source stories and check and corroborate and ring people and be upfront and transparent as far as you can. I'm planning to do this. Can we have a discussion about it on the record, off the record? And that is navigated day by day. You don't do it right sometimes, and you learn. People get upset and you take something from that. Or you do it right and you say, okay, that's the way to do it. And that brings me all the way to your point about your sort of working week. If you really want a sort of an example in a nutshell, I actually sort of prioritize exercise and well-being above the professional side of things, even though that's critically important to me. But I don't think the professional side will function without my physical and mental well-being. So, as you know with me, Hugh, I like to stay fit. I'll go to the gym. I'll try and play a bit of sport where possible. Paddle tennis, my big thing now. There's many hours in the day if you get up early enough. The problem is I go to sleep too late and gets me in a lot of trouble. But you can control this in a way that sets you up quite well for a week in my life. So yeah, a lot of exercise, a lot of eating well and looking after yourself in that sense. And then I will always be in tune with what's going on in the industry because I read a lot and I do a lot of the stories myself. And I'm talking to colleagues and editors at The Athletic. I'm going on television. So you become part of the sort of cycle. You know what's going on. And there'll be certain things that I'm working on. Yeah, I'm privy to some information. I'm in continual dialogue with people about when I might be able to do something. I need to make more checks. Are we going to pursue this interview? And that is a process. You've got to talk things through. You've got to find a date. You've got to travel potentially. Then you've got to work on it. Then there's output. When is it going to be published? That's the kind of set piece stuff around like an interview or a feature. But a lot of the breaking news world, you can't plan for it. So it's just about being in tune with everything. You know, there's situation brewing there. The manager doesn't look safe. I need to keep an eye on that. This player's coming out of contract soon, or there's only a couple of years left and he's doing fantastically. I need to make checks around that. It's a player that's doing really well. It's in the public eye. There's a transfer window coming. You know, what things do I need to be looking out for? Who might be moving? Who is in a position that they're wanted or they've got a relatively short time left on their deal? You know, what major events are coming up? The Club World Cup. What are people doing around that? Let me speak to people at this club. Maybe I'll go for a lunch with them and they'll give me ideas for stories and features. And I prioritize the things that are brewing off the back of a weekend. But you'll be in tune with that even on Sunday night. And then, you'll know you maybe have to record a podcast for The Athletic, or we have a chat like this, or I'm speaking to students at a university on a Zoom or something like that. But in and amongst it, it's just calling, it's speaking, it's texting, it's meeting, turning over every stone to fulfill my duty as a journalist. What story might I be able to uncover? What story are others working on? Brilliant journalists out there at national publications, at regional publications, local publications, on social media. I don't break them all. I see like absolutely dozens of stories every day that I'm thinking, really well done. Maybe I can pick up on that. Maybe I can develop it further. Maybe I just need to stand it up and corroborate it. And so, yeah, it's just sort of like a doctor on call. You're always available. You're always attentive. Now, I might be taking my kids to football training or being at their rugby match, or, there are commitments, but you've always got your phone on you, and you do need to draw lines for your own sanity, but especially in a transfer window. Again, back to your original point, there is no set week other than those staple things of exercise, well-being, the odd commitment on a podcast or a broadcast here or there. I've got a contract with NBC that I'm really proud of. I'm on every weekend on the Premier League, things like that. But outside of that, it's like what you can uncover as a journalist, what you need to react to, what your editors decide they would like you to pursue or help other journalists with, and kind of roll with it. And that would be really unsettling for a lot of people who have 9-to-5 jobs in offices. I get that completely. It's not sociable. It's very antisocial. You end up missing a lot of friends and family events, or not being present at a lot of things in your own family or in your various movements. But it's all I know. I don't know what I would do if it wasn't this, and therefore I just give it my all every sort of waking hour, throw my blood, sweat and tears into it, and hope to do a good job.
Sounds like an agent. I think a lot of the stuff, obviously, especially being on this pod, I think a lot of the stuff that you said there about being by the phone, waiting for this call, waiting for that call, going to this game, going to that game, it resonates with, I guess, I'm new to it, but stuff that Marlon has gone through for the last 15, 20 years of the industry. So, it's really interesting to hear the way your week works.
Maybe we should pick up with Marlon on that point that you just made there, Curtis, because I think, how can you not love David Ornstein, having heard what he's had to say about how he views his career and the work that goes into making those incredible stories. And yet, Marlon, there are many people who either have distrust in journalists, or, from your side, you may have seen stories, read stories about your clients that aren't true, about yourself that aren't true possibly as well. But also you need to have a good working relationship with them. You need to be able to pick up the phone to a journalist. So where is that relationship for you?
I think it's about finding the right balance. You can't have, and I say it to a lot of our clients, you can't have a top flight Premier League career or any career in Europe without working with the media. Whether we like it or we don't like it, they have the power to write the headlines that can set the perception of you, how fans look at you, how the club sees you. And from our side as representatives, we have to be fully aware of that. So you can't ignore the media. But I think I've said it before, it's a bit of a love-hate relationship. When things are going really well and they're writing great stories about your clients, really good in-depth articles, it's brilliant because they're helping you raise the profile or the value of your client. However, the flip side is they have the power to break you as well. And I think we've all seen the flip side of it, I suppose, where the media can negatively impact a player's career. And, from our side, we have to pick up those pieces from there and sort of try and battle back against that narrative or against the negative. So it is striking that balance. And from our side, we can't answer the phone to every journalist that calls us. Otherwise, I'll be answering my phone 1,000 times a day. But what you learn is to have your network, and what David said before about building a network of trusted individuals within that. From our side, that extends to the media as well. If we're going to sit down for coffees, we want to sit down for coffees with people who understand how we work, understand the pressures that we have in terms of confidentiality, timing, that if you want to talk about something, there's an element of trust there, and you build that trust over time. So I know the journalists that I can speak to and say, listen, I will tell you, but hold that for a couple of weeks to buy me some time, versus the journalist where I have no track record with. I will be very guarded, and any client or any player will be very guarded towards that journalist. But it is finding the right balance.
I think there is a happy medium to be struck. And a lot of it comes down to common sense and being grown up about these things. And it is a two-way process. So as much as I want information and need to report on what's going on, there are many situations where the people on the other side, whether it be clubs, national governing bodies, executives within those, staff members at football clubs in this particular conversation, but that extends to other sports I've worked on in cricket, tennis, rugby, cycling, Olympics, and so on. And the protagonists, the sports people like Curtis, their families, they often want to articulate some points, maybe to explain correctly, to clarify something that was inaccurate, to get ahead and be proactive, to try and serve their own best interests. Sometimes that's in an unethical way. People come to you. I remember years ago, I got some call from an agent I'd never heard of in another country, just saying, "Can you put this story out?" And I was like, "What? Like, is it even true? I need to make checks." And those are actually the building blocks which you learn from. Some people want to do an interview. They come to you and say, "Look, can you do this?" And you assess it, because they might just be wanting it for profile reasons, and that could be valid. Like, it's an interview that you've wanted to do for ages, and it's perfect, and you shake hands and let's get this rolling. But other times you're like, but hang on a sec, there's a lot that's gone wrong with this person, and if we're to do an interview, I would I'd have to. It's my responsibility to ask the tough questions. And some of them say, no, that's not why we came to you. And then you have to sort of say, well, you might want to go elsewhere, or reconsider that. Or some say, yep, totally. We've learned to trust you, and you will handle it correctly. And so there's always like conversations that can be had to get to the right place. And something I'm acutely aware of in this kind of sphere is that you're not going to have it all your own way on either side. Like, there are some occasions where everybody is happy, but there's compromise to be had. And when Marlon talks there about the conversations, there has been such a historic lack of trust and suspicion, and things have gone wrong, that it's very easy for that to get worse. And there are examples going on in the industry where things don't work out. And so I find, and sorry to bring it back to me, that despite it being, and I talked about at the top, ever harder because of the profile and the stakes being higher, because essentially those with the information, more often than not, would like to block it, that they don't want it coming out. And the role of a journalist is to bring it out. So there's an inherent conflict there. We've got kind of opposite priorities. But if you can be a person who does things correctly and shows that through your work as well, and it evidences when somebody says something to you in confidence, you don't break that confidence, and they see the benefit in the repercussion. Your actions speak louder than words. You don't turn around and they say something to you that must stay between you, and suddenly you've either said it in broadcast or print, or you've told somebody else in the industry, and it's a bit of a village, football or sport, it gets back to people. And they're like, well, why did you betray me? I'm not going to speak to you. Or you have some unfortunate incidents where you don't quite understand what the person meant when they said, please don't mention that. And I don't know, they meant ever, and you thought it was just for a couple of days until things have died down, and you go and say it because, I don't know, you want to report, you've got a job to do, or you're anxious, you want to make your mark on social media, and you think you're the big I am, and that will be my breakthrough, and I won't tell who told me, but I'm going to sneak it out. That's a recipe for disaster. It takes a very long time to build trust and relationships, but it can be broken in an instance. And we've all had bad moments where we've misjudged situations, which always leads me now to check to the nth degree. And I don't want to scare people off the story that I check so much that they start to second guess themselves and doubt and say, actually, no, you've worried me here. But I would rather the worry and the conversation and all the sensitivities get ironed out before you get to the stage of publication. Because as a journalist, you need to understand the gift you have in your hands and also the power. When something's in the public domain, you know, they say a mistruth travels half the way around the world before the accuracy puts it right. And I never underestimate the privilege, the honor, the responsibility and the duty that's bestowed upon my shoulders. And that's why I'd be mortified if I knowingly got something wrong. As I said earlier, there are some errors here or there, and you can never check enough. And if in doubt, just step back and accept that you can't do something. But sorry, going back to the main point, that if you can illustrate in this wild west that you can do things right and you can be trusted and you can have a two-way relationship and coexist, then it can actually be a very healthy and good environment. It can actually benefit you in this day and age. And the final point I'll make on the two-way thing, and I said that sometimes people come to you with information and then you need to do your due diligence, etc. But for it's an industry largely of ego, and there's a lot of agendas at play. You've again got a huge responsibility to sift through that and make the right decisions and talk to your colleagues and your editors, in my case, about doing things right. But for all of the, and Marlon articulated this much more succinctly than me, for all of the moments at which, I don't know, a club is guarding some information like the crown jewels, the moment that they need to get on the front foot and say, oh, you know, this is wrong, we need to correct this, we need to put this right, we're going to call that journalist. It's really quite confusing and head spinning for a journalist that one minute you hate me and you want nothing to do with me and I can't get you to pick up the phone, and the next minute you're all over me and you're using me as or trying to use me as a platform and as a conduit to get your side of the story out. And that's why in this moment that we're in now, and it will only increase in importance, you need to navigate this really skillfully, and you need to do your time and have your experiences and talk like this and build your connections and networks, because and in this day and age, and I'm going to expand it out to sort of especially politics and some of the things going on in the world, I think like the impact of words and actions on social and mainstream media is being doubted and scrutinized by the public more than ever before, and therefore your standards need to be as sharp and as high as possible.
Trust was a big word in all of that, and it's great that you have such high standards. I think there are a lot of people within football that would say you might be an exception rather than the rule, that the quality of your work and the time that goes into it. Curtis, I got to ask you, you know, you were a player for a long time, you deal with players now as well. How do players feel about journalists and about the media industry?
It's a difficult one. I think in the early days of my career, and depending on the level you're at, so for instance, when I was at League One level and I started off at Luton Town, the only real time that journalists would turn up, or would you'd ever have any, I guess, not an interaction, but anything written about you, was when you read your mark in the paper. So a player might have a gripe with a certain journalist because they gave them a 5 when they thought they were a 7 or an 8. So that happens, and then, you know, that's where it starts. But I think as time has progressed, and it's even in the lower levels now, that there's media teams everywhere. There's specific journalists that go to certain clubs. So I think nowadays the relationships can be built, but relationships, again, it can be built on that trust. I think players are always going to be weary. I think they'll trust the in-house team because they know that they're always going to have the club's best interests. But I think there's a lot of players out there now that want it all their own way. As David said, there needs to be a bit of give and a bit of take. You can't have it that you want this big publicized story about what you're doing so well in your career, when actually you've had a stinker for a few months and now they're writing about that. So I think there's a bit of give and take. I think me individually, I've always understood the role of the media and always had a good relationship, because I know it's necessary. And the necessary part of it is not that you can control narratives, but if you can look at yourself in the mirror and know how you've done after a game, be it in a win, a loss, or a draw, you know how you performed, and you can look yourself in the mirror and say, I've done poorly, I've done well. Whatever a journalist writes, you're going to be okay with, in my opinion, because that's the way I was. For instance, I think the famous comment I made with Pat Murphy after my Aston Villa debut was, I played like a pub player. But that's because he could have had the opportunity to say that on the air. Someone else could have had the opportunity to write it. But that's what I believed. So I controlled the narrative by saying, I know I was poor. I think I was poor. Write what you want about it. It's kind of like, that's just the way I was. And I think there's always a case of, if you're honest with yourself, I think you'll never be disappointed. But I think nowadays it's gone to the new level of, not only for your footballing, it's about controlling the narrative towards your, as David said, your boot deal, your partnerships, you know, whatever. If you're going to ever play for England, you know, you need a bit more column inches to possibly be considered for England, and stats now play such a big thing. So are these journalists posting your stats that somebody picks up, thinks, oh, he's a brilliant player because of his stats? So I think, the game has changed so much from the start to the end, but I think ultimately the media is more necessary now than they ever were before.
Controlling the narrative. Now we know how you managed to keep that clean-cut All-American boy reputation. What happens in Iron Apple stays in Iron Apple, obviously. Listen, let's move to social media next, because it's dominating the media landscape in many regards, not just in sport. And ITKs, David, in the knows, have emerged, these accounts on particularly Twitter, but elsewhere on social media, that feel like they're breaking stories, many of them seemingly anonymous, though, claiming to be, as it says, in the know. How many of those people are just bluffers in your view?
It's really hard to know, because it's an unregulated, wide open world that many of us are still coming to terms with. And you use a really interesting word there, bluffers. There may be some, there are, of course. But that doesn't mean that on occasions they might not say something that's accurate. They might not have got it on good authority. They may have got it on good authority. You don't know who you bump into or get access to or overhear a conversation, and there's no editorial guidelines on social media. It's not sort of traditional journalism where you have to be checking things and getting it right and offering rights of reply. People can do what they want, and that gives license to a lot of bad work and trouble and problems. It also gives license to a lot of good work for people who maybe are striving to become journalists or don't have a voice or a platform, and that extends way beyond sport. So social media is really important. On the bluffers point, and when I said some people get it right, it's more sort of, if you throw enough mud, some of it will stick. You know, that you look at the track record of certain accounts that are posting, and they say loads that's wrong, and then suddenly they say something that was right, and everybody go, this person is the one, and then they revert to type for a couple of years of getting everything wrong, and then maybe they get something right again. And you've got to be sort of conscious and aware of that, and that's okay. Sort of take it for what it is. Then there may be some people posting that are in the know, like that they may be masquerading as just some faceless Twitter account, but maybe they're an employee inside an organization, a club, a governing body, an agency, and they want to get information out there. They know that the impact that it may have, maybe players themselves. I don't know. There's nothing surprises me on social media anymore. The good, the bad, the indifferent. It can be frustrating at times, especially when you have a process and you do things properly, and you're sort of battling against this sort of ocean of information and cut through it. And sometimes it amazes me when myself, colleagues, other journalists manage to break the scoop or the big story, get it right, and it hasn't come out anywhere yet, because pretty much everything seems to come out first now, and it shows there is still a place for quality. What I remember and have to remind myself a lot is that it doesn't matter what's being said in that sphere. You have a responsibility to, if you're freelance yourself, if you are employed like me at The Athletic and other outlets who I do work for, then they still want you to provide. When you say it, people think it's accurate, and that's a real blessing that people think like that. I would never have imagined that when this started out. I was actually quite cynical towards social media, and I never thought I would become a successful journalist. And so you've got to serve who you're working for. Just because it's come out elsewhere or there's rumors, you don't know if it's right or wrong. You don't know who's behind it. Credit to people who do it and get it right. Not such credit to people that get it wrong and cause some disruption. And I think by and large, although some posts that are inaccurate go viral, Marlon could tell you better than me whether it disrupts negotiations, whether it causes problems, headaches. And by the way, that can happen with mainstream journalists as well, who get right or wrong information, and they have even more credibility than some of these accounts, and that's potentially extremely damaging. And it's something I remember at all times. But in social media, it's just so sort of chaotic that you kind of try and focus on yourself and uphold the standards that you always live by. And normally it works out quite well. When I was listening to the guys earlier, one of the other points I was thinking is, you know, in this scrutinized world, when Curtis is talking about you know, what the media is saying about you and things like that, and Marlon's talking about clients and what they might want to get out there and not, you know, you need to have respect for yourself as a journalist or a producer of information. Many people, because of the impact you're saying, Hugh, with social media, will try and go through you. They will try to use you. And that happens with me. Of course, people are going to be articulating their points. Get this out. The most frustrating thing of all is when you speak to somebody, you may give a compliment, good performance or whatever, because you're in touch with people all the time. They've scored, they've done well, they've won a trophy. Or you say, I really felt they should have been on the pitch today. And the executive, owner, chairman, chief executive, player, manager comes back and goes, write it. Like, And many people will, and I see through quite a lot of that, and I think we all do, when people are kind of doing something to help somebody, and I think we need to be wary of, again, way beyond sport, but the purpose and the intent of certain posts and social media, and just take a critical eye. A lot of the stuff out there that gets posted, whether it's by someone we know or someone we don't, then bleeds into radio talk shows, television programs, newspaper articles, websites, conversations among friends. And I'm there thinking, that's not true. And you guys must know it more, being on the inside. Like, the horse is bolted and you can't get it back in the stable. Like, people like me can then come out and say, no, I understand it's different. But like, it's really difficult to stand by when some of these mistruths and misinformation seep into the national, international fan-based discourse. But ultimately, again, like, you can only control yourself and maybe the people that you work with. And I think the onus on us in that ITK world, and again, full respect. Like, I'm not being arrogant or looking down on anyone. To the contrary, I've got the most amount of admiration you can for other journalists, and I'm accepting of that ITK world. But we have to act correctly in positions like mine, and there is still space for that.
Marlon, how do you manage it when the lie's gone around the world before the truth has even got its pants on, and it's one of your clients? How do you manage that? The club might be calling you, or journalists might be calling you and saying, "Oh my God, your player's done X and Y." And you can say it's not true, but at times you probably won't be believed. How do you manage it all?
I think it's one of the biggest frustrations for me is, and as David said, once the horse is bolted, it's out there, and what that triggers is a whole knock-on series of events, which is you trying to get back or bring people back to what the truth is or what the actual accurate parts are. But it happens all the time. In the lead up to every transfer window, or even during a transfer window, if I'm in the middle of doing a transaction or a deal or a negotiation or talking, there could be 3 or 4 or 5 different clubs that we're talking to about this one particular player. If suddenly it goes firing round that he's signed here or he's signed, you get the ones I love, the eyeball emojis and the timing tickers that deal arriving soon. And I'm sitting there going, we're a million miles from doing a deal, right? And that then triggers on 5 other journalists calling me when we're doing the negotiation, saying, "Has he signed? Is it done? Is it done?" And it's such a big distraction whilst you're in the middle of actually doing the negotiation. But we can't control that. There's just this enormous fan-driven appetite to get that information first, to predict the future so that they can say, I told you, I was that ITK, I was that in the know. And unfortunately, it causes havoc for us guys when we're actually trying to keep a lid on things. And listen, sometimes it's brilliant. Sometimes it helps when your players link to 4 or 5 clubs, because listen, if a club believes there's 4 or 5 other interested parties, it gives me some leverage in that negotiation. But the realness is that if we're trying to close a deal, it doesn't serve me a purpose to play that out in the media, because you want it done confidentially and quietly so that your contract negotiation has time to breathe and is not rushed by people saying, are we done? Are we this? You don't want eyes on it. You want to conclude it professionally. So it does cause frustrations, but it is all driven by this insatiable appetite for people to say, I told you. And that's a massive change. And that's all driven by social media, because it's the you can get that message out there instantly. Whereas before social, it was, we had print deadlines. So that article wouldn't go to print until 11 p.m. No matter if it was filed at 2 p.m, you had time to change it. Whereas the instant nature of putting an ITK transfer rumor out there is instant, and it just goes. And when it goes, and we talk about things going viral, it spins, and you can't control it at that point. As much as it's a frustration, you can't control it. All you can do is, you know what the truth is. And if you want to let a load of people run off and look like idiots at the end of it, then that's on them. Because I've seen plenty of, wannabe David Ornsteins who are starting out, who think the best way of doing it is by doing a numbers game and throwing as many of my clients to as many clubs as possible and saying it's going to happen, when in the end they're proved wrong. And when you have a series of incorrect ITK or announcements, you're going to get discredited. And for an agency, we'll control it by working with the guys who we can trust. But if you've blown your chance with us, you're not going to get back in.
Obviously, you've spoken about the in the nose and that side of getting things wrong and people sometimes guessing or bluffing, shall we say. But in terms of when Hugh spoke about trying to, someone sends a story out before they've got the truth. I had a situation myself with a tabloid where it's more of a scandal type thing. So that's the other side that people, I know we're speaking about stories with, oh, I broke that transfer first. There's a side that can affect your family as well. So for instance, I had a newspaper that called me on, let's say it's a Saturday evening, and they're telling me that I've slept with this girl and I've got her pregnant, and they're going to run the story in the next day's paper. So I'm like, I've never met the person. I've had no interaction ever. I don't even think I've ever been in the same environment, let alone spoken to the person. And they're like, well, you know, if you have no comment, we're just going to run the story anyway. I'm like, that's fine, no problem. I was confident, I was all right. I said, run the story, that's fine. My lawyers will be in touch tomorrow once it runs. And then what happened is, after all of that, they didn't trust the intel they had because of my bone-faced confidence and stone, like I was, my reaction to it. And they run the story with my name in it, but saying that the girl was tricked into thinking it was somebody that was me. So it was cheeky in a way. And I guess if I really wanted to pursue it, I could have possibly sued because they used my name and they used my name in it. But, you know, my face was then plastered all over a paper with a story that literally has zero to do with me. David, you work for a much better organization, and I think you're more about the integrity of the game and stuff like that over who slept with who and all of that. But it's amazing that somebody can sit there and write out this story knowing it's a pack of lies, to then just to have a story to post. And it's what you said about their integrity and not needing the next story. They obviously do, and that's where the distrust with players comes in, and kind of that side. Whereas your side, listen, write what you want about me having a bad game. That's not going to affect my family life. But if you try and make up lies about you've been doing this or that on nights out, it just totally changes everything in your personal life.
Yeah, I might just interject there because you can make a podcast in itself about that very topic. I don't know where to begin, and it's so foreign to the way I work and the part of the industry I work in that I cringe at the thought of that sort of misinformation and the collateral damage it can have. And I don't want to badmouth and besmirch a part of the industry. I just have no experience of it, and it must be really hazardous. The one thing you would like to think is, as a result of stuff like that, which hopefully is more historic than present, that's not to say there aren't examples now, places more trust in the places that do things right. And there are a number of publications, and almost if we then extrapolate that back into my world, there are many, and I actually feel bad about this at times, because there are great journalists at publications and outlets who, when they do stuff, because of that track record of inaccuracy, people kind of still don't believe it, even though on occasions it might be right. And it plays into the hands of people who do have a better reputation. And that's where you're very thankful, and you need to cherish that more than ever. And you conjured some other thoughts in my mind as well. So a lot of what Marlon said there about the negotiations and the sensitivity, people doing the deals or making the appointments, unless their process is a mess, it's really important to stay calm, because you know the truth, and a lot can go out and a lot can affect things. I was only speaking to somebody yesterday about a process that's ongoing now, and certain names come out into the public domain that are right or wrong and can have a direct impact on the negotiation with the person that, say, is getting the job, or you need to keep people in a process to make sure you're doing your diligence and you're going through things as you can. And the moment it comes out, it's a problem. But for all, and this is where my mind just explodes and I find it very confusing, for all of the people who are trying to keep things discreet and in-house and quiet, they often flip, and they are the ones that leak stuff out when it suits them, because suddenly the negotiation is not going as planned. And the ones that didn't let any information come out because it was all on track suddenly find themselves in a sticky situation. And they're like, well, if we let it be known, so that they're trying to finalize a player transfer all under the radar, and then it hits a snag, and the player's having doubts, or the agent's asking for too much money, or the selling club wants more. Suddenly the buying club says, actually, we'll put out the name of somebody else who's on our radar, who's on our list, or maybe not, maybe it's just a phantom name, to try and scare the selling club and the player and the agent to actually play to their tune and get this done. And that, again, puts you in a really difficult position as a journalist, because for all of the times where it's not helpful for these people for stuff to come out, there are times when it is. And you're walking this tightrope and stepping on eggshells all the time. Am I okay to do this? Am I not? What will he or she think today? What will he or she think and say tomorrow? And that's, again, part of the ability to sort of traverse in and amongst it all. And one thing I quite like to do, and it's a bit of a weird thing, again, it's not come from any place other than goodwill, is when I'm speaking to players, executives, especially younger players or maybe less experienced people within the industry, and they may come to me for advice and say, how would that play out in the public? And often, despite being a journalist, I'm honest with my feedback. Don't say that. Don't let that come out. Do it properly. You know, that might not work in your contract negotiation with the club. Like, almost coaching them. And I don't have any sort of formal experience of doing it, but sort of perception and common sense and feel and touch from the amount of time that I've been doing what I'm doing. Because what the guys both say, I know they're very different examples, especially what Curtis said, but it all comes back to the same thing of the media is in and amongst it. The protagonists, the player, the agent, are in and amongst it. And there are many others that are not on this conversation, but try to find a way of making it work, because it is possible.
I was going to discuss YouTube channels and players controlling the narrative that Curtis mentioned through that way. But actually, you mentioned something about, you used the word leak. And I think that has been so prevalent in terms of changing rooms at football clubs up and down the country over the past couple of years that I've got to pick up on it. And Marlon, I'm going to come to you on this one, because I need to know, have you ever had a player at a club where you feel there's a leaker in the changing room? How do you deal with that? Or has one of your clients been accused of being a leaker? Have you been accused by a club of leaking stories? How does that affect your player and yourself in terms of how you can function?
I think leaks are almost inevitable now, with the spotlight on it. Trying to find where the leak comes from, especially in a high-level transfer, is like trying to find a pinprick of a water leak in a mansion. Ripping up floorboards everywhere, trying to find where it's come from. Have the agent is generally the first person that gets accused of leaking it. Let's start there. So we're prime suspect number one. if we go back to David's chart of having everyone everywhere, it's generally the agent is the number one target on that one. It it doesn't serve us a purpose if it's real. Do we like a bit of gamesmanship? Do we like to, get something from using the media or putting a line out there? Yes. I'm not going to stand up here and say agents don't play the media. We do, and we have to. But only if it's to our benefit. And sometimes that's actually saying a little bit less rather than more. In terms of leaks from players and at clubs, players will talk to players within changing rooms and they think that will stay there, but that may go to a teammate's brother, that then may go to a teammate's brother's friend, and then suddenly you lose control of where that bit of news goes to. But it does drive you mad when you see things that come out that can actually unsettle a transfer. And I had one during the transfer window where we'd agreed something between clubs, which I thought was actually a good valuation on a player. I was surprised that the deal was getting done at that valuation. But the club wanted it very, very quiet to get away from any eyes and ears as to what they were letting that player go for. It suddenly got out that player was going when there'd been no eyes on it at all. It was almost like a silent transfer. No one knew anything about it. Because it became public, and it went on a very big, very large followed transfer ITK specialist. And once it goes that far, that big, you're clawing it back. It prompted the club to actually pull the transfer and change the valuations, because they felt if it got out and that was actually how it went down, they get a backlash from their own fans for letting a player go for what was really under market value. So that leak actually caused all of the negotiations to be put on pause, and it took another 10 days for that transfer to flush itself out, and it generally was paused because of a leak. So it does have an impact. Finding that leak is impossible because no one knows up to it. But you can try for your best detective hat on and try and figure out where it's come from. But yeah, unfortunately, we're prime suspect number one.
That the agents seem to be used, and some agents may be the person, but equally some executives may be the person. I've seen examples where the people doing the mole hunt, which seems to be the big thing inside clubs and organizations these days, the people at the top of the tree who institute the mole hunt, they're the ones who are giving stuff out. That's how ridiculous it can get at times. And I always, when I'm speaking to clubs about this sort of thing, think you're just going to chase your tail, because a lot of what I've explained to you today, the bonds with connections and contacts and acquaintances become so strong with some people that you're not going to suss it out. And if you do, then information will appear from elsewhere. Some people are doing it on purpose. They may be unhappy. They've got an axe to grind, whether it's in the dressing room or in the boardroom or elsewhere inside the club. And equally, Marlon nailed this. It can not be as sophisticated as some people make out. So there are many people privy to a transfer situation, whether it be the player, their family, the buying club, the selling club or loaning club, the agent, administrative staff, medical staff, media staff. I know that tends to be a bit later, but people are working inside the same offices, canteen staff, delivery people. It can actually be innocent passing on of information. Often things come to me, and I'm sure the same with many other journalists, and the club are fuming, or both clubs are fuming. How on earth did he get this again? And sometimes it's coincidence or luck, or even like just people you've bumped into in other industries, finance people, lawyers who maybe let something slip when they shouldn't. You name it. That there are so many different avenues for this that you're probably wasting your time. If it's a consistent leak, then I understand why they're looking into it. And we've seen that at clubs in recent times. But then it comes back to how strong the bonds and the relations are, and what agendas may be at play. And one of the things I touched upon in my previous answer about how I sort of like informally coach or give feedback to some people or have conversations. And again, this is like not what a journalist should say, but there are occasions where you need to box clever. You're privy to some information and you speak to people about it and you think, you know what, like that might not be the best story for me. There's probably not that much to gain, but there could be a lot to lose for my relationship with that person or these people. It's going to cause total carnage inside a club. And what do I benefit from it? Not a great deal. Talk it through with your contacts. If somebody is telling you some stuff and they might not quite appreciate how the media works and how big the impact is, and maybe, you know, they're going to get looked at and it could affect their employment. They could be sacked if it's ever found out. You maybe say to them, just be careful on this sort of stuff. We'll part that. I've done a lot of stories on this club recently, so maybe don't, or that player recently. I don't really want eyes looking at us and saying, oh, they know each other. Often there are eyes that look at people and say, oh, they know each other. That's where he's getting all his stories from. And it can be beautiful because it's absolutely not them. It's not the obvious. It's people elsewhere. And again, that goes back to chasing your tail. This is not as black and white. And I always think the clubs, I know the information is important. That's the whole purpose of this podcast. But they spend more time chasing the leaks, which they'll never get to the bottom of, than focusing on getting their houses in order and doing things right operationally and creating an environment that means that things are not leaking because they're better at what they're doing. They're getting their finances right. Their recruitment's improving. Their contract process is getting better. No one will ever be perfect, but most of the clubs where things are not leaking out is because they're running really good operations. Most of their business is good. And a final point on that, and sorry, I just keep banging on, it's been amazing to have all this conversation, is that when something comes out on a player's performance, like Curtis alluded to, or on a player, as Marlon alluded to, and they get angry at a journalist for bringing this to the fore, and of course I'm going to defend my industry in this case, it's not the media's fault that this happened, that a contract negotiation broke down, that a transfer is occurring. And I often ring the clubs and say I've got this story, or ring sources and contacts, and they're like, oh God. And one of the things we often come back to, and it's why I've got good relations, is one, it wasn't my fault that things, you've got a takeover happening, and I found out about it. People talk. And that it leads me to my final point on this, is that very rarely do things stay inside now. It always comes out. 99% of the time, something's going to come out. And so if you are able to deal with it properly and represent it fairly and in a balanced way that doesn't cause total chaos and keeps a bit of decorum about the process, then many people will deal with you subsequently, whether it be a club, an agent, a family, a national association, because they understand the nature of the beast that we're dealing with these days, and they really appreciate people that do it properly, and that's a massive benefit to what I do as well. And it sometimes you get it wrong. So you'll try and engage and you'll say to people, we should talk about this. I know it's happening. No. Don't answer the phone or don't respond to text. Or when you do speak, they're like, don't you dare. That will cause chaos. And you say, but it's going to come out. And then there's a very real chance that you'll say, oh, I should have talked to you about this. And they say, no, we can't do it. It's not going to come out. And then it comes out and they say, sugar, I should have spoken to you about it. We should have dealt with this properly. I'll know for the future. And so as much as I'm learning all the time and the guys are learning in what they do, so is everybody else in this environment. And like there's kind of set pattern to it all. You kind of have to handle it as best you can in any given circumstance.
David, it's been absolutely incredible diving into your knowledge, and I know you're a very busy person, so really appreciate you giving us the time. You mentioned, before you put, I think you called it an explosion earlier on out to the public. There's a bit of excitement or whatever, but it's a big story and you want to be right about it. Can you leave us with an Orn bomb before you go? I think that's what the kids are calling it. What big move are you expecting to happen this summer? Maybe on the continent, maybe someone coming into the Premier League.
What a brilliant question. And one you didn't prep me for.
No, I didn't. Now he's scanning his mind to know, can I report that? Can I? No.
Yeah, I'll give, I guess, an opinion because it's not evidenced at this point, and that means I hopefully won't get in trouble. I fail to see how clubs that at the very top level who have money and need a striker in a market that has where the supply is far outweighed by the demand, don't look to Alexander Isak and Newcastle, despite Newcastle's stance, which I admire, and they've been repeated in their desire and intention to keep him, to try and renew his contract. It's got loads of time left on it. But the water, I'm sure, will be tested on that one. And with clubs who have the ability to spend high and offer what Newcastle might not, let's see if they qualify for the Champions League themselves, offer him Champions League football, which is the level he should be playing at. Yes, he's under contract until 2028, but if he's not going to renew, then there's a depreciation there, and there's a potential to have an unhappy player. I'm not saying with Isak, everyone listening, maybe he's really happy there. I'm saying in general. And so I can't think of many circumstances this summer that, and Newcastle fans will hate me for saying this, and I'm sorry, and I admire them greatly. But I think Alexander Isak's future has an extremely high chance of dominating the media landscape over the summer. And so I'm going to have to go with him.
You heard it here first. David, really appreciate you being with us. Marlon, Curtis Davis as well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge on this topic. It's been absolutely incredible, so thank you so much. Well, thank you all for listening as well. What an incredible conversation we had there. Listen, if you're watching at the moment, you can listen to this wherever you get your podcast from, all those usual platforms. And if you're listening to this, then the full video version is available. You can watch it on Spotify. You can also, of course, watch it on YouTube. Listen, wherever you're tuned in today, we'd love to hear feedback from you as well. So make sure you comment down in the comment section, but you can also leave us a review and let us know what more you'd like to hear as well, because we are trying to lift the lid on the industry. So many great topics we can delve into. Let us know where you would like us to go next. We'll be back very soon with another episode. Hope you enjoyed this one. If you're not subscribed though, make sure you do. Hit the notification button as well. You will not miss an episode, and we'll see you very soon. Take care.